if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon.
Unfortunately, wherever you go in this country, the darker your skin, the more you look like a criminal. That's a problem.
The hoodie is as much responsible for Trayvon Martin's death as George Zimmerman was.
Well, you can imagine what we're going to lead tonight's program with. Right now, what would be justice for Trayvon? Everyone from, you just heard Geraldo Rivera inexplicably with logic, to the President of the United States sounding off on this tragic Florida shooting. In the wake of his death, there are as many questions as answers as we report to you tonight. And how much did the issue of race play a role in his death? We're going to get into that tonight. And should we have a national gun policy? As you're going to see here tonight, state by state, the rules are different, and they vary simply by where the borders of state lines start and end. We have quite a bit to get to this hour. Now, I want to welcome everybody to the program. I'm Richard French, and thank you so much for joining us on RFL this Friday evening, March 23rd. Now, the shooting of Trayvon Martin, it has captured the nation's attention in a lot of different ways. Meanwhile, the shooter, neighborhood watchman George Zimmerman, nowhere to be found to report tonight. And joining us to sound off on the shooting and all the angles that come out of it, as well as so much more news from the political campaign trail, as well as other issues for our region and beyond. Let's bring in our panel: Greg Ball, New York State Senator; Dominic Carter, veteran political journalist and author; Basil Michael, political strategist and former top aide of Hillary Clinton and professor at Columbia University; and Andrew Whitman, senior political correspondent. And Andrew, start us off with the very latest, because there was a lot to report today.
Well, the online movement with all of this and the social media movement continues. More than 1 million people have signed a petition calling for Zimmerman to be arrested in this case. In the meantime, police in Sanford, Florida don't know where Zimmerman is. The police say he's not a suspect, so they don't have to be following him. And although he's taken a low profile since the shooting, the incident itself has ignited a nationwide firestorm. And today, that storm reached all the way to the White House. President Obama weighed in on the killing of unarmed Florida teen Trayvon Martin and the controversy surrounding the subsequent investigation.
To the parents of Trayvon Martin. If I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. I think they are right to expect that all of us as Americans are going to take this with the seriousness it deserves.
While the Justice Department and a special state prosecutor are investigating, Neighborhood Watch Captain George Zimmerman, who says he shot the teen out of self-defense, is yet to face charges. The city manager of Sanford, Florida, insists the police department has nothing to hide.
We want justice. We want as many eyes looking at this as possible. This is not something that's been whitewashed.
The size and scope of the protests seem to grow each day. Students from over a dozen Miami, Florida area high schools staged walkouts today, at this one forming Martin's initials on their football field. And on Capitol Hill, about 300 demonstrators wore hoodies, what Martin wore the night he was shot and killed last month after returning from a neighborhood 7-Eleven.
Look to the right, to the left, and recognize it could have been anybody that was standing here.
Last night, a massive crowd gathered in Sanford with Trayvon's parents in what was called a rally for justice.
Thank you for all your support. It means a lot to me and my family. We really appreciate it. We want justice for Trayvon.
And Rich, of course, this is a case that hits on a lot of topics all coming together at the same time, including race, guns, gun laws, and so much more. It's,
Yeah, there was an image today, guys, and a lot to get to, but if we can bring up this picture from the Miami Heat, listen, usually sports doesn't play. No, that's not it, guys. That's the cartoon that I'll get to in a second. I'm looking from the graphic from the Miami Heat where the team posed in a photo. Look at that. Every member of the team, not a coincidence, they're wearing a hoodie here. Dwayne Wade and LeBron James, they were behind this. I think a very powerful sign here, communicating an image and the word hoodies. That this unacceptable. We've seen the protests come out of it. And guys, I'm not asking us to play amateur attorneys on how this is going to happen. We're going to get into the law in Florida that's at the root of this next segment. But what I want to start with right now, and Basil, I'll start with you and work my way around the table. If Trayvon were a white kid that night, and he was coming home with Skittles and a soda in his pocket, would he be dead today?
Absolutely not. I mean, this is a story, unfortunately, that is repeated time and time and time again all over our country for decades. It doesn't matter whether you, contrary to what Geraldo has said, doesn't matter whether you're wearing a hood or not, whether your pants are down to your ankles or not. No matter what you have in your pockets, you could be an innocent young man, whether you're stopped and frisked in a way that is embarrassing and intrusive, or you could be shot and killed. This unfortunately is happening all over the country in only our communities. And we keep asking why, but there are really no answers coming on the other side. But we all know the answer, and quite frankly. And unfortunately, my concern is that this will not be the last time it happens.
Andrew, we that's just reference a Geraldo comment. And guys in there, if we can play, this is Geraldo Rivera on Fox News, and I don't think he intended for it to come out as callous, but there's no explanation from my vantage point. It's just moronic. But this is what he had to say, why the shooting took place, and he didn't in any way mitigate that that the shooter in this particular case here was right or justified in what he did. But in some way, shape, or form, what young Trayvon wore that night, he says, is equally responsible as the actions of the shooter. Take a listen for yourselves.
But I am urging the parents of Black and Latino youngsters particularly to not let their children go out wearing hoodies. I think the hoodie is as much responsible for Trayvon Martin's death as George Zimmerman was.
What do you mean?
When you see a kid walking, Juliet, when you see a kid walking down the street, particularly a dark-skinned kid like my son Cruz, who I constantly yelled at when he was going out wearing a damn hoodie or those pants around his ankles, take that hood off. People look at you and what do they think? What's the instant identification? What's the instant association?
You know what? I think that he's not just speaking for himself. I think a lot of people, guys, certainly not me, but in people's back of their heads, they said, well, you know what? If you dress the part, you look the part, stuff's going to happen.
But isn't that the same argument that gets used about, women who are dressed in too short a skirt and, the claims that they're asking to be raped? I mean, that's the way I took it initially, that it just seemed incredibly inappropriate. There may be a kernel of truth to what he said, but that's not the system that we're supposed to live in. That's not how it's supposed to work. I mean, that was my first reaction to it.
Dominic, I heard also in conversation today, columnist for the Seattle Times talking about the talk. And jump into, Basil, because I can't relate to this, but apparently there's talk that
Of course there is.
Every parent,
black male
uncle
goes through
has
it.
and says, this is what happens, this is your reality versus somebody else's, this is how you ought to act, this is how you hold the steering wheel if you're pulled over. Explain what they're talking about.
Well, the talk is something that every African-American male, and even females, but mostly males, receive. If there's a male in the household, it comes from the male. In my case, there was no male. I was raised by 3 women, a grandmother and 2 aunts. My mom wasn't in the picture. So my aunt would sit me down, and it's not just one conversation. Please correct me if I'm saying something wrong.
Right.
It's not just one conversation, it's several. And the way it goes is like this. Dominic, I mean, from the time you're a little African-American boy, you're not allowed to play with toy guns. Don't ever play with toy guns when you're outside. Because when I was growing up, there were a lot of cases, and police officers do have to make split-second decisions of whether or not the gun is real or it's fake.
In fact, they stopped making certain plastic guns.
Now they put them where there's an orange piece, some of them. But then the second part of the conversation is you always got to work twice as hard your entire life. You can't be seen as bold or disrespectful. Don't flirt with white women. I'm being as honest as I can be. And certainly, there's a long procedure of how you deal with law enforcement. So even today, I'm 48 years old, and when I'm pulled over by the police, my hands are on the steering wheel, and I instruct young African Americans in the projects all the time of how to handle police. officer, is it okay? This is what I actually go through right now if I'm pulled over. And normally I'm not harassed by the police. But officer, you asked for my ID and is it okay if I reach into my, so no threatening action. I let him or her know that they're in control of it. Okay, officer, I now need to reach into the glove compartment to get this document. Every black youngster in America has received the talk of what you better do if you want to survive.
That's absolutely right. And let me tell you, I've been this size since I was 12. So, and I've gotten, and I got stopped by the police, not driving at 12, but walking down the street in my own neighborhood. And so what you're saying is absolutely correct, because we all have that talk with every adult male in our lives, and it also happened with the adult females in my life. But what is striking to me is that even in this case, maybe we'll talk about it again in a little bit, this wasn't law enforcement.
Right.
And that's what's so shocking about it, because it wasn't law enforcement, but it's a conversation that we have to have, apparently, whether it's law enforcement or not. It used to be, now it's clothing and hoods and pants hanging down. But it used to be, well, you're just not in the right place at the right time, wrong block, wrong neighborhood, driving the wrong car, walking with the wrong kind of woman, wrong color woman. There's always an excuse, right? There's always an excuse. The bar always gets moved, but the problem does not stop, and that's the issue.
I just wanted to add one more. There's a long history of, when it comes to race differentials in cases, especially in murder cases or fatal cases, there's a long history of, let's say, white juries being more difficult or being more harsh on black suspects, and the other way around, or white juries being lenient on white people who are accused of killing blacks. This law prevents even that process from getting started.